The world had reduced itself to a singular, deafening frequency. The snap hiss of rounds passing inches from her helmet and the chaotic screaming of a man who had never seen blood that wasn't on a spreadsheet. Captain Elena Vance tasted copper and dust. She was on her knees behind the crumbled remains of a mud brick wall, her radio handset gripped so tight her knuckles were white. "You listen to me, you incompetence bitch!" Julian Thorne grabbed her plate carrier, yanking her back. The force of it knocked the wind out of her, disrupting her line of sight on the ridge where the RPGs were raining down. "I said hold fire! My prototypes are in that truck! You blow that ridge, you bury my future!" Thorne's face was a mask of red-faced, vein-popping fury. He shoved her again, harder this time, pinning her against the cover. "Do you know who I am? I own your chain of command." Elena didn't blink. She didn't shout back. She looked through him, her eyes locking onto the distant shimmer of heat against the azure sky. Her thumb had never left the push-to-talk button. "Hog 1-1, this is Viper," she said, her voice terrifyingly flat amidst the explosions. "Cleared hot, danger close, make it rain." Then came the sound. A low, tearing brrrt that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. Thorne froze, his arrogance instantly replaced by primal terror. He didn't know it yet, but the argument was over. The heat on the tarmac at Bagram didn't just sit on you. It tried to enter your pores and cook you from the inside out. It was 1400 Zulu, and the sun was a white hammer against the anvil of the earth. Captain Elena Viper Rossi stood by the rear bumper of the lead up-armored SUV, running her thumb over the frequency dial of her AN/PRC 152 radio. Channel 1, Convoy Internal, Channel 2, Quick Reaction Force, Channel 3, the sky, always the sky. "Captain, we have a friction point," Master Sergeant Miller said, approaching her. Miller was a mountain of a man, a Tier 1 operator whose beard had collected more dust than most politicians' vacuums. He didn't get rattled, which meant the tension in his jaw was a bad sign. Elena didn't look up from her checklist. "Is it the package?" "The package," Miller spat the word like a curse, "is currently refusing to wear his plates because they wrinkle his linen suit." Elena sighed, a sharp exhale through her nose. She clipped the radio to her vest, checked the seating of her M4 magazines, and adjusted the boom mic of her headset. "I'll handle it. Double-check the tire pressure on Vehicle 3. It looked low." "Copy that, ma'am." Elena walked toward the center of the convoy, where a heated argument was displacing the oxygen. Julian Thorne stood by the open door of the darkly tinted SUV. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who thought war was a concept that happened to other people. He wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than Elena's annual salary, and he was currently berating a young corporal who was holding a heavy ceramic plate carrier. "I am not wearing 30 pounds of Kevlar for a 40-minute drive," Thorne snapped, wiping sweat from his receding hairline with a silk handkerchief. "I have a meeting with Minister Azizi. I will not arrive looking like a sweating grunt." Elena stepped into his personal space. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself with a kinetic density that made people step back. Thorne didn't. "Mr. Thorne," Elena said, her voice dropping to that deceptive calm she used right before calling in a strike. "ROE for this sector mandates full PPE for all personnel, no exceptions." Thorne turned to her, his eyes scanning her up and down with a dismissal that made her skin crawl. It wasn't sexual, it was hierarchical. To him, she was furniture. "Captain Rossi, is it?" Thorne sneered. "I was told I'd have a SEAL detail. Instead, I get you." He gestured vaguely at her frame. "I assume you're the administrative attachment?" "I'm the JTAC," Elena said, I'm the only reason anything in the sky won't kill you today. Put the vest on." Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Listen to me, little lady. My company, Horizon Defense, supplies the guidance chips for the drones you people worship. I outrank your general in terms of net worth and political utility. Now get out of my face and tell the driver to start the engine." He turned his back on her to enter the vehicle. Elena moved. It wasn't a violent move, just a precise placement of her body between him and the door. She slammed the armored door shut with a heavy thud that echoed across the tarmac. Silence rippled through the nearby prep teams. "We don't move until you are armored," Elena said, locking eyes with him. "And if you call me little lady again, I will have you zip-tied and thrown in the trunk as cargo. That is a promise, not a threat." Thorne's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. For a second she thought he might strike her. The violence was there, coiled in his shoulders, the entitlement of a man who had never been told no. Instead, he pulled out a satellite phone. "Get me Colonel Holloway." He spoke for 30 seconds, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. A smirk slowly replaced the anger. He handed the phone to her. "For you." Elena took the device. "Captain Rossi." "Elena," Colonel Holloway's voice was tired, strained. "Let him ride without the vest if he wants. Just get him to the meet. We are already behind schedule and state is breathing down my neck." "Sir," Elena protested, gripping the phone tight. "If he takes a round, then he takes a round, Captain. That's an order. Wheels up in 5. The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone, the betrayal stinging more than the heat. She handed it back to Thorne. "Told you," Thorne whispered, leaning in close. He smelled of expensive mints and decay. "You're just the help, Rossi. Don't forget that." He opened the door and slid inside, unarmored and smug. Elena stood there for a moment, watching the heat waves dance off the armor. She felt a cold knot form in her stomach. It wasn't fear of the enemy. It was the certainty that the man in the back seat was going to get them all killed. "Mount up!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the noise. "We are rolling out!" As she climbed into the lead vehicle, she checked her radio one last time. She switched to the encrypted frequency for the air wing. "Hog 1-1, this is Viper. Radio check." "Viper, Hog 1-1, Lima Charlie. We have you on the screen. Angels 20, good hunting." Good hunting, she thought. If only we knew what we were actually hunting. She slammed the door, sealing herself in the trap. The transition from the sterile safety of the base to the chaotic sprawl of the outskirts was always jarring. One moment, there were blast walls and ID checkpoints. The next, there was open sewage, colorful market stalls, and a sea of eyes watching the convoy pass. Captain Elena Rossi sat in the front passenger seat of the lead SUV, her eyes scanning the Blue Force Tracker, BFT screen mounted on the dashboard. The digital map showed their convoy as a string of blue icons moving along a yellow supply route dubbed Route Copper. "Speed is 45, Miller announced from the driver's seat. His hands were loose on the wheel, but his eyes were constantly flicking between the mirrors and the road ahead. "Crowd density is moderate. Keep your heads on a swivel." "Copy," Elena replied, pressing the PTT on her chest. "Viper to all elements. Maintain 50-meter dispersion. Watch the rooftops." The radio crackled with acknowledgments from the 3 gun trucks. But then, a different tone broke through the rhythm, the strained whine of an engine pushing too hard. "Viper, this is rear guard," the voice of the tail gunner came through, tight with concern. "The package's cargo truck is lagging. We're opening up a gap. Current separation is 100 meters and widening." Elena swore silently. She tapped the screen on the BFT. The icon for Thorne's truck, a civilian white box truck that looked like it belonged delivering furniture in suburbia rather than navigating a war zone, was blinking further and further behind the main body. "Package driver, this is Viper," Elena said, keeping her voice even. "Close the gap. You are leaving the security bubble." "I can't, ma'am," the driver's voice came back, sounding harried. "She's heavy. The suspension is bottoming out on these potholes. If I push it past 40, I risk snapping an axle." Elena frowned. Thorne had claimed the truck contained sensitive communication prototypes. Computer chips and circuit boards didn't weigh enough to crush a truck's suspension. He was hauling lead or gold, or something far denser than he had declared. "Lead vehicle, drop speed to 30, Elena ordered. "We need to let them catch up. A gap that size is an invitation for a VBIED. "Negative! Negative!" Thorne's voice blasted over the command net, overriding the driver. He wasn't using proper radio etiquette. He was just shouting into a handset. "Captain Rossi, do not slow down. We are already 10 minutes behind schedule. Minister Azizi does not wait for traffic." Elena keyed her mic, her tone turning to steel. "Mr. Thorne, get off this net. Unless you want a suicide bomber slotting a sedan between your truck and my guns, you will let me run this convoy." "I am ordering you to maintain speed," Thorne screamed. "My cargo is priority 1. If that truck stops, the mission fails." The irony was suffocating. He cared more about the truck than his own life, yet he refused to let them protect it properly. Elena looked out the window. The market crowds were thickening. Men on mopeds weaved dangerously close to the convoy's perimeter. Every intersection was a choke point. Every parked car was a potential bomb. "Miller, slow it down to 25, Elena commanded, ignoring Thorne. "Box them in." As the lead vehicle slowed, the convoy compressed like an accordion. The tension inside the cab spiked. Slow targets were dead targets. They were trading one risk for another, velocity for cohesion. The white box truck lumbered forward, finally closing the distance, its engine groaning in protest. As it drew closer, Elena saw the wheel wells. The tires were bulging. That truck was overloaded by at least 2 tons. "All stations, tighten up," Elena said. "We are moving through the bottleneck at the market. Stay frosty." They entered the shadow of the buildings. The sun was blocked by multi-story concrete structures, unfinished and rebar exposed, looming over the narrow street. The smell of roasting meat and diesel fumes was thick enough to taste. Elena felt the familiar prickle on the back of her neck. It was the sensation of being watched, not by curious civilians, but by predators. She scanned the upper floors, looking for the glint of optics or the silhouette of a weapon. "Miller, watch that overpass," she murmured. "I see it. Clear for now." Thorne's voice came back on the radio, smug this time. "See, Captain? No explosion, just wasted time. You are overly cautious, which is a polite way of saying cowardly." Elena didn't dignify that with a response. She was watching a man on a second-story balcony, about 200 meters ahead on the left. He wasn't looking at the convoy. He was looking at a Nokia brick phone in his hand. He wasn't filming. "Contact front left," Elena barked, her body tensing. "Rooftop red shirt. He's on a trigger." "Gunner, traverse left," Miller yelled. The turret on their roof swung around with a mechanical whine. The man in the red shirt looked up, saw the .50 caliber barrel pointing directly at his chest, and froze. He didn't press the button. He slowly lowered the phone and stepped back into the shadows, disappearing behind a hanging rug. "He stood down," the gunner reported. adrenaline shaking his voice. No act. Keep moving, Elena said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Push through. Speed up to 50 now that the road opens up. Did you see that? Miller asked quietly. He was waiting for the gap. If we hadn't slowed down to close it, he would have detonated on the cargo truck. I know, Elena replied. She looked at the BFT screen. Thorne's icon was safe, sandwiched between the guns. He had no idea how close he had just come to being vaporized, and if she told him, he would just claim she was hallucinating to justify her insubordination. Viper to package, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Gap closed, resuming speed. About time, Thorne huffed. Try to keep up, Rossi. Elena leaned back in her seat, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. They hadn't even reached the valley yet, and the weight of the mission was already crushing the suspension of her patience. The man on the roof hadn't fired, which meant only one thing. This wasn't the kill zone. They were just herding the sheep to the slaughterhouse. The topography changed as abruptly as the mood. The urban clutter of the outskirts fell away, replaced by the jagged, unforgiving teeth of the mountains. The road narrowed, turning from asphalt to hard-packed dirt and gravel that wound like a scar into the mouth of the valley, known as the Throat. Inside the lead SUV, the air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the rising temperature and the sensory oppression of the landscape. But it wasn't the heat that made Elena's stomach turn. It was the sky. To the west, a wall of bruised purple and sickly yellow was consuming the horizon. A shamal, a dust storm, was moving in fast, swallowing the light. Elena tapped her headset, switching frequencies to the ISR platform loitering at 20,000 feet. Reaper 2-6, this is Viper. How do things look from the cheap seats? The voice of the drone pilot in Nevada crackled in her ear, distorted by the atmospheric interference. Viper 2-6, visibility is degrading rapidly. I'm switching to thermal, but the dust is thick. It's like looking through a dirty milkshake up here. I give it 10 mics before I'm legally blind. Elena looked at the screen mounted on the dash. The crisp, black and white video feed was already graining out. The jagged ridgelines that overlooked the road, perfect positions for plunging fire, were becoming indistinct smears of gray. Miller, Elena said, her voice tight. Hold position, convoy halt. Halt! 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 Miller relayed the command down the line. The convoy ground to a stop just a kilometer from the entrance of the canyon. The dust cloud was already obscuring the sun, casting a premature, eerie twilight over the vehicles. Why are we stopping? Thorne's voice barked over the net immediately. We are already behind! Elena ignored the radio and opened her door. The wind hit her instantly, carrying grit that stung her exposed skin. She walked back to Thorne's vehicle. He didn't roll down the window. He opened the door, letting the dust invade his pristine, climate-controlled bubble. Mr. Thorne, Elena shouted over the rising wind. We are losing our eye in the sky. That storm is going to ground my air cover. Without the drone, we can't see what's waiting on those ridges. Standard operating procedure dictates we RTB or hold until visibility improves. Thorne looked at the approaching wall of dust, then back at her. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed, like a man whose flight had been delayed by a sprinkle of rain. We do not turn back, Thorne stated, stepping out of the SUV. He adjusted his suit jacket, oblivious to the absurdity of his appearance in the middle of a wasteland. My cargo is temperature sensitive. If we sit here for hours, the heat in that uninsulated truck will ruin millions of dollars of hardware. And if we drive into an ambush without air support, the heat from an RPG will ruin your life. Elena countered, stepping closer. We are blind, sir. I cannot protect you if I cannot see the threat. Thorne smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned in, lowering his voice so the nearby SEALs wouldn't hear the specifics. You think I rely solely on you and your toys, Captain? Thorne tapped the side of his nose. I have business arrangements with the local leadership in this valley. I paid a very steep toll to ensure this route is clear today. Green light all the way, as you people say. Elena stared at him, stunned by the sheer arrogance. He was admitting to paying off warlords. He was funding the very insurgency they were supposed to be fighting, all to secure safe passage for his contraband. You bribed the militia? Elena asked, disgust coloring her tone. Sir, intel bought with cash expires the moment the money changes hands. You cannot trust. I trust leverage, Thorne cut her off. And I trust that if we don't deliver these chips, my company loses a contract that pays for your salary. Now get back in your truck and drive. Or do I need to call the colonel again and tell him you're scared of a little dust? Elena looked at the looming canyon walls. They were jagged, towering tombstones waiting for names. Her instinct screamed at her to turn the convoy around. Every tactical bone in her body was vibrating with warning. But the chain of command had shackled her to this man's ego. She had no proof he was lying. If she turned back, and the route was clear, she ended her career today. If she pushed forward, she risked their lives. If you're wrong, Elena said, her voice low and dangerous, my Reaper can't save you. I'm never wrong about investments, Thorne sneered. Drive. Elena marched back to the lead vehicle, the taste of sand grinding between her teeth. She slammed the door shut, sealing out the howling wind, but trapping the tension inside. We moving? Miller asked, looking at her face. He knew that look. It was the look of a soldier ordered to walk into a minefield. Push, Elena said, staring straight ahead. But keep the spacing tight. Weapons free. If anything moves on those ridges, kill it. The convoy lurched forward, rolling into the throat of the valley. The light died. The dust storm swallowed them whole. Visibility dropped to 50 meters, then 30. The world outside the bulletproof glass became a swirling vortex of brown and orange. Elena glued her eyes to the drone feed. It was her only lifeline, a fragile thread connecting them to safety. Reaper 2-6, I need anything you've got, she pleaded into the mic. I'm trying, Viper, the pilot replied, frustration evident. Sensors are saturated. I'm getting ghost returns everywhere. On the small screen, the image flickered. Static lines cut across the view. The thermal camera tried to pierce the dust, turning the world into a wash of gray noise. Elena watched the convoy's heat signature moving slowly through the monochromatic void. Ahead of them, the road curved sharply around a blind bend. Suddenly, the screen glitched, a block of pixels distorted. For a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, a cluster of white-hot shapes bloomed on the ridgeline directly above the bend. They weren't rocks. Rocks didn't hold heat like that. They were linear, horizontal heat signatures. Barrels, warm barrels. Contact! Elena screamed, grabbing the handset. Contact front! Ambush! Before she could finish the word, the drone feed cut to pure, snowy static. Reaper is offline, the pilot's voice faded. Link lost. And then the windshield of the lead SUV shattered into 1,000 diamonds as the first RPG slammed into the earth 10 meters in front of them, blowing the world apart. Thorne's toll hadn't been enough, or maybe he had just paid for his own execution. The world did not go black. It went white. A concussive wave slammed into the front of the lead SUV like the fist of a titan. The armored vehicle, weighing nearly 5 tons, was lifted off its front axle and thrown sideways. Metal shrieked against stone as the chassis ground into the canyon wall, the impact tossing Elena against her seatbelt with enough force to bruise ribs through her ballistic plate. For 3 seconds, there was no sound, only a high-pitched, piercing whine that drilled into the center of her skull. Then, the audio rushed back in a violent torrent, the thump, thump, thump of heavy machine gun fire, the shattering of glass, the screaming of the engine block dying in a pool of oil and coolant. "Contact front! Contact right! RPG!" Miller was roaring, his voice distorted by the ringing in Elena's ears. He was already forcing his door open, his M4 raised. Elena shook her head, fighting the nausea. Her vision blurred, then snapped into focus. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks, opaque and useless. Through the side window, she saw tracers streaking down from the ridgelines like angry hornets, stitching the ground around their crippled vehicle. They were on the X, the kill zone. "Bail out! Bail out!" Elena screamed, unbuckling her harness. She grabbed her rifle and the radio handset. "Viper to all elements, contact front, push through, push through!" But they couldn't push through. The lead SUV was dead, blocking the narrow track. The second vehicle, Thorne's SUV, had slammed on its brakes to avoid a collision, and the cargo truck behind it had jackknifed in the panic. They were a stationary snake, and the hawks were diving. Elena kicked her door open and rolled out onto the dirt. The heat of the burning engine washed over her. Bullets snapped past her head, crack, thwack, kicking up geysers of dust. "Smoke! Pop smoke!" she yelled. Miller was already on it. He pulled the pin on a purple M18 smoke grenade and hurled it towards the ridge. A thick, billowing cloud began to obscure their position, buying them seconds of reprieve from the precision fire. From the second vehicle, the turret gunner was working his MK-48 machine gun. The belt-fed weapon roared, sending 7.62 mm rounds chewing into the rocks above. It was the only thing keeping the enemy heads down. Elena scrambled towards the second SUV. She needed to secure the package. If Thorne died, the mission was a wash. If he was captured, it was a geopolitical catastrophe. She reached Thorne's door and yanked it open. "Get out! Move to the cover of the rocks!" she ordered, reaching in to grab him. The back seat was empty. Elena froze for a microsecond. She spun around, scanning the chaos through the haze of purple smoke and brown dust. "Where is the package?" she shouted into her comms. "He bolted!" A SEAL from the rear guard yelled back over the gunfire. "He ran back to the truck! He's going for the cargo!" Elena cursed, a creative string of profanities that would have peeled paint. "Cover me!" She broke cover, sprinting crouched towards the rear of the convoy. The air around her felt alive, buzzing with death. An RPG warhead whooshed overhead, impacting the canyon wall 50 meters up, showering them with shale and debris. She found Thorne at the back of the white box truck. The driver was slumped over the wheel, dead or unconscious. Blood was sprayed across the inside of the cab. Thorne didn't seem to notice. He was frantically keying the code into the heavy padlock on the roll-up rear door. "Thorne, get down!" Elena tackled him just as a burst of AK-47 fire stitched a line of holes across the side of the truck, inches from his head. They hit the dirt together, grit grinding into her face. Thorne shoved her off, his eyes wide and manic. He wasn't terrified of dying. He was terrified of the door remaining closed. "Get off me!" he screamed, scrambling back up. "I have to secure it!" We need to move! The truck is a target! Elena grabbed his collar, trying to drag him toward the ditch on the side of the road. Thorne spun on her, his face twisted. You don't understand. If they take this… He punched the final digit into the keypad. The lock clicked. He threw the roll-up door open. Elena raised her weapon, expecting to see racks of servers, crates of microchips, or high-tech guidance systems packed in anti-static foam. She stopped. The breath left her lungs, and it wasn't from the altitude. The truck wasn't carrying electronics. It was packed floor to ceiling with long wooden crates stamped with Cyrillic markings. One crate had been smashed open by the jackknife impact. Spilling out were not guidance chips. They were shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile launchers. Man-pads. Specifically, the Russian-made Igla-S. The realization hit Elena harder than the IED. Thorne wasn't selling tech to the U.S. military. He was smuggling anti-aircraft weapons through a U.S.-controlled zone to sell to the highest bidder, likely the very insurgents currently shooting at them. You son of a bitch, Elena whispered, the noise of the battle fading into a dull roar. You're running guns. Thorne looked at her, then at the weapons. For a moment, the arrogance faltered, replaced by the desperate look of a man caught in a trap of his own making. They aren't for them, Thorne stammered, his voice rising in hysteria. It's a side deal, off the books. It pays for the R&D. A mortar round impacted 20 meters away, knocking them both flat. The shockwave rattled Elena's teeth. Dirt rained down on the exposed missiles. We are leaving the truck, Elena roared, pointing her M4 not at the enemy, but at Thorne's chest. Move, now, or I leave you here with your merchandise. Thorne looked at the missiles, then at the lethal resolve in Elena's eyes. He realized she wasn't bluffing. Covering fire, Elena yelled into her radio. Moving to the rally point. I have the package. She grabbed Thorne by the back of his expensive, dust-ruined suit and hauled him toward the ruins of an old shepherd's hut near the roadside. As they ran, the Mk-48 gunner on the second truck laid down a wall of lead, screaming defiance at the mountains. They dove behind the crumbling mud brick wall of the hut, just as another RPG slammed into the cargo truck. The explosion was different this time. It wasn't just the warhead. The fuel and the warheads inside the truck cooked off. A massive fireball erupted, turning the white box truck into a volcano of shrapnel and secondary explosions. Thorne watched his fortune burn, his face a mask of horror. Elena checked her magazine. She didn't look at the fire. She looked at Thorne. The dynamic had shifted. He wasn't just a VIP anymore. He was a war criminal. And she was the only one who knew. You better hope we survive this, Elena said, her voice cutting through the ringing silence between blasts. Because if we do, I'm going to need an explanation for why I just watched a SAM battery burn. Thorne didn't answer. He was staring at the flames, trembling. But Elena knew that look. It wasn't regret. It was calculation. He was already figuring out how to make sure she never repeated what she saw. Incoming! Miller yelled, diving into the ruin beside them. They're flanking left. We need air support, Viper. Now! Elena looked at her radio. The static was still there, but through the crackle she heard a faint, rhythmic pulse. The storm was thick, but the connection was trying to re-establish. I'm working on it, she said, pulling the handset to her mouth. But we're going to have to hold this rock until I can find a hole in the sky. The sound of a mortar leaving the tube is a distinct, hollow thump, like a heavy book dropped on a carpet in the room upstairs. The sound of it landing is the sound of the world ending. Crump. The explosion walked 20 meters closer. shaking the mud brick walls of the shepherd's hut. Dust rained down from the rotting wooden beams of the ceiling, coating everyone in a fine gray powder that looked like cremated bone. "They're walking it in!" Miller roared, kicking a hole through the back wall of the hut to create a loophole for his rifle. "Smitty, get the saw on the east window. Suppress that ridge." Elena crouched in the center of the room, the safest point from shrapnel, but the most suffocating. The hut was small, barely 4 meters by 4 meters, smelling of old goat dung and fresh fear. The team was effectively trapped in a stone coffin. She brought her Vector 21 laser rangefinder to her eyes, peering through a crack in the masonry. The optics cut through the lingering smoke of the burning truck outside. She laced the ridgeline where the muzzle flashes were blooming. Distance, 640 meters. Elevation, plus 12 degrees. "They have the high ground and heavy weapons," Elena said. Her voice calm despite the adrenaline dumping into her system. "That's a 60mm mortar pit and at least 2 DSHKs. They're bracketing us." Another round whistled in, impacting the ground just outside the door. Shrapnel pinged against the stone like hail. Thorne screamed, curling into a ball in the corner, his hands over his head. His suit was ruined, covered in muck and the blood of his dead driver. "Make it stop!" Thorne yelled, his voice cracking. "Call the jets! Bomb them!" Elena lowered the rangefinder and turned on him. The rage she felt was colder than the mountain air. She crawled over to him, grabbing his lapel and dragging his face close to hers. "I can't call the jets because the radio is jammed by the terrain," she hissed. "And even if I could, I'd have to explain why we're taking fire from sophisticated positions that knew exactly when we were coming." "I told you! I paid them!" Thorne spluttered, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit that didn't exist. "It was supposed to be a handoff." "A handoff?" Miller shouted from the window, firing a controlled burst. "You were selling surface-to-air missiles to the Taliban, you piece of trash. Those Iglas are going to be used to shoot down the very pilots coming to save your ass." "It's not the Taliban," Thorne retorted, defensive even in the face of death. "It's the Northern Alliance splinter group. They are strategic partners against ISIS-K." "They are shooting at us!" Miller yelled back. Elena released Thorne with a shove. She moved back to the loophole. She needed to think. The enemy tactics were sound, but they were conservative. A standard ambush would have started with a mass casualty initiation, RPGs into every vehicle simultaneously. Instead, they had disabled the lead truck, then pinned them. And now, the mortar fire was accurate, but it wasn't finishing them. They were hitting the perimeter, stripping away their cover, but not dropping around through the roof. Why? If they had eyes on the target, which they clearly did from that ridge, they could see the roof was soft. One well-placed 60mm round would kill everyone inside. "Miller," Elena called out. "Check fire for a second. Let them shoot." "Captain, just do it. Cease fire." "Check fire! Check fire!" Miller ordered. The SEALs stopped shooting. The hut fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the men and the crackle of the burning truck outside. The enemy fire didn't intensify. It slackened. A few sporadic shots hit the walls, keeping them pinned, but the heavy machine guns stopped chewing up the masonry. Elena watched the ridge. She saw movement. A figure stood up, silhouetted against the sky, looking down at them through binoculars. He wasn't taking cover. He was observing. "They aren't trying to kill us," Elena whispered. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "Not all of us." She turned to Thorne. He was wiping sweat from his forehead, looking slightly relieved that the noise had stopped. "Mr. Thorne," Elena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Stand up." "What?" "Stand up and go to the window." "Are you insane? They'll shoot me." "I don't think they will," Elena said. She didn't wait for his permission. She grabbed his arm and hauled him up, shoving him toward the open window frame facing the ridge. "No, no." Thorne struggled, terrified. Elena forced him into the frame for 2 seconds, then pulled him back. Nothing happened. No hail of bullets, no sniper shot. Elena looked at Miller. Miller's eyes went wide. He understood. "They have a PID on him," Miller said grimly. "They want the seller alive, probably to get the money back for the merchandise we just blew up. Or to get the rest of the shipment," Elena added. "Those crates in the truck were just a down payment, weren't they, Thorne?" Thorne was trembling, his back against the wall. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You have more missiles," Elena stated, not asking. "Where? At the airstrip? In the warehouse back at Bagram?" Thorne clamped his mouth shut. Elena looked back out at the ridge. The pause in firing wasn't mercy. It was a negotiation. They were tightening the noose, waiting for the Americans to run out of ammo or water, so they could walk in and take Thorne. The SEALs and Elena were just collateral damage to be mopped up once the prize was secured. "We are in a kill box," Elena said, assessing the tactical board in her head. "But we have one advantage. They think we're trapped. They think we're protecting him." "We are protecting him," Smitty grunted, reloading his saw. "That's the mission." "No," Elena said, checking the battery on her radio. "The mission was to extract a VIP. That man ceased to be a VIP the moment he engaged in arms trafficking against U.S. interests. Right now, he is a detained hostile combatant who happens to be our only leverage." She looked at the crumbling ceiling. The dust was still falling. "Miller, how much ammo do we have?" 3 mags per man, 2 belts for the saw, 1 smoke left." "Not enough for a breakout," Elena muttered. She looked at the SATCOM antenna on her kit. It was damaged, but the short-range VHF was still operational. If she could get higher, out of this defilade, she might reach the A-10s. "I need to get to high ground," Elena said, pointing to a rocky outcrop about 50 meters up the slope behind the hut. "If I can get there, I can get line of sight for the radio." "That's suicide," Miller said. "Even if they want Thorne alive, they'll cut you down the second you break cover." Elena looked at Thorne, then at the ridge. An idea formed, a dark, cold calculation that violated every safety protocol she had ever learned. "They won't shoot," Elena said, her eyes fixing on Thorne. "Not if I'm standing next to their investment." Thorne's eyes bulged. "You can't be serious. You can't use me as a shield." "You used my country as a shield for your smuggling," Elena said, checking the chamber of her rifle. "Now it's time to return the favor." She grabbed Thorne by the collar of his suit. "We're going for a walk, Julian. Try not to trip." The distance from the back door of the shepherd's hut to the rocky outcrop was only 50 meters, but it was 50 meters of uphill, loose shale, exposed to the eyes of 100 gunmen. "On my mark!" Elena yelled, her grip on Thorne's collar tightening until her knuckles turned white. "Miller, Smitty, suppress the ridge. Make them keep their heads down." "Ready," Miller shouted back, the barrel of his M4 smoking. "Go! Go! Go!" Elena burst out of the hut, dragging Thorne with her. He stumbled, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the gravel, but she didn't let up. She was fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated rage. Thorne screamed as they hit the open air. "Don't shoot! I'm here! I'm here!" He wasn't shouting at the SEALs. He was shouting at the enemy. The response from the ridge was immediate. The heavy DSHK machine guns opened up, but the impact points were erratic. The bullets chewed up the ground 5 meters to their left, then 10 meters to their right. They were bracketing, but they weren't traversing through them. "They see you," Elena hissed, hauling Thorne up a steep shelf of rock. "Keep moving, you miserable bastard, or I will drop you and let them turn you into pink mist." They scrambled up the slope. Elena's lungs burned, the thin mountain air tearing at her throat. The weight of her plate carrier, the radio on her back, and the struggling man in her grip was crushing. They reached the outcrop, a jagged tooth of granite that offered a sliver of cover from the north, but left them completely exposed to the east. Elena shoved Thorne down behind the rock and immediately unslung her pack. She checked the ANPRC 1-17G radio. The display was flashing "No SAT." The steep canyon walls were blocking the satellite uplink. "Damn it!" she cursed, wiping sweat and dirt from the screen. "Shadows are too deep." "We're going to die here," Thorne whimpered, curled in a fetal position. "You brought us up here to die." "Shut up," Elena snapped. She switched the band from SATCOM to VHF. If she couldn't reach the satellite, she had to hope there was an aircraft already in the sky, loitering high enough to catch a line-of-sight signal. It was a long shot. VHF required a direct path. Rock blocked it as effectively as lead blocked radiation. She extended the whip antenna, maximizing the gain. Any station, this is Viper 1-1, declaring troops in contact. Immediate assistance required. Over." Static. The white noise of the universe. Below them, the battle was intensifying. Miller and the SEALs were firing sparingly now, conserving their dwindling ammunition. The enemy was closing in, moving down the slopes like a slow landslide of inevitable death. "Any station, this is Viper. We are black on ammo, black on water. Enemy is danger close. Do you copy?" Nothing but the squelch of the radio. Thorne sat up. He looked at the radio, then at Elena. A strange expression crossed his face. Not fear, but a twisted kind of opportunism. "It's not working," Thorne said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Give it up, Rossi. We surrender. I can talk to them. I can make a deal." "There is no deal," Elena said, keying the mic again. "They just want your inventory. Once they have it, they'll cut your head off on live video." "No!" Thorne lunged at her. He grabbed the antenna, trying to wrench the radio from her hands. "Stop calling them. If the planes come, they'll bomb everything. They'll destroy the leverage." Elena was taken off guard. She hadn't expected him to fight her. She fell back against the rock, the radio slipping. Thorne scrambled on top of her, his hands grappling for the handset. He was heavy, panicked, and desperate. "Let go!" Elena shouted, kneeing him hard in the ribs. Thorne grunted, but didn't let go. "I won't let you ruin this. I have insurance." He wasn't trying to save his life anymore. He was trying to save his assets. He was terrified that an airstrike would obliterate the evidence of his arms dealing, or perhaps destroy the remaining cash he had hidden nearby. Elena saw red. She released the radio with one hand and drew her combat knife from her chest rig. She didn't stab him. She slammed the heavy pommel of the handle into the side of his head. Thorne collapsed sideways, dazed, blood trickling from his temple. Elena scrambled back to a sitting position, gasping for air. She grabbed the handset again. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the violation of it all. A civilian under her protection had just attacked her. She looked up at the sky. It was a seamless blue, indifferent to their suffering. Please, she whispered. She keyed the mic one last time. She didn't use standard protocol, she just spoke to the void. Blind transmission. This is Viper. We are overrun. If anyone can hear me, bring the rain. She released the button. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then, a voice cut through the static. It was calm, drawling, and sounded like it came from a front porch in Texas rather than a cockpit at 30,000 feet. Viper, this is Hog 1-1. I hear you 5x5. Sounds like you folks are having a bad day down there. Elena let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. Tears cut tracks through the dust on her face. Hog 1-1, Viper, she choked out, forcing her voice back into professional cadence. We are pinned in the wadi at grid Echo Tango 7-9er. We need immediate KS. Danger close. Copy that, Viper. We see the smoke. Me and my wingman are rolling in. Keep your heads down, darling. The cavalry is here. Elena looked down at the unconscious Thorn. She looked down at Miller, who was frantically reloading his last magazine. Miller! She screamed down the slope. Heads down! Inbound! 30 seconds! Miller looked up, confused. Then he heard it. It started as a low whine, barely audible over the gunfire. Then it grew, a deep, guttural roar that vibrated in the chest. 2 dark specks appeared over the rim of the canyon, diving at an angle that seemed impossible. The A-10 Thunderbolt IIs, the Warthogs. They weren't just planes. They were flying guns built around a 30mm cannon that fired depleted uranium shells the size of milk bottles. Elena pressed herself against the rock, covering her ears. She looked at Thorn. You wanted to know who I am? She whispered to his unconscious form. I'm the one who holds the leash. The first A-10 opened fire. Brrrt! The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of the sky tearing open. The sound of the GAU-8 Avenger is not something you hear. It is something you survive. The first pass was a suppression run. The 30mm rounds, each the size of a beer bottle and dense with depleted uranium, hit the ridgeline opposite them with the force of a geological event. The Earth didn't just explode, it liquefied. Rocks, scrub brush, and human bodies were churned into a fine red mist. The delay between the visual impact, the sudden eruption of dust, and the auditory brrrr was a terrifying reminder of the physics of death. The bullets traveled faster than the sound of their own arrival. Elena pressed her face into the grit of the granite outcrop, shielding her eyes from the debris raining down. The vibration rattled her teeth, shaking the very marrow of her bones. Beside her, Julian Thorn gasped, choking on dust as he regained consciousness. He scrambled backward, eyes wide, staring at the devastation across the valley. The side of his face was swelling where Elena had struck him, a purple bruise blooming under the layer of dirt. What? What did you do? Thorn wheezed, his voice trembling. Elena ignored him. She was already back on the handset, her voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. Hog 1-1. Good effect on target. Enemy suppression achieved. Adjust fire left. 100 meters. I have squirters moving to the secondary defilade. Copy that, Viper. Tally on the squirters. Rolling in for re-attack. West to east. The A-10 banked sharply overhead, its gray belly flashing in the sun, looking like a predatory shark circling in a sea of blue. Thorn grabbed Elena's shoulder. His grip was weak, desperate. Stop it! You have to stop them! Elena slapped his hand away without looking at him. Sit down and shut up, Thorn. Unless you want to explain to the pilots why you'd prefer the enemy to keep shooting at us. You don't understand! Thorn screamed, trying to be heard over the roar of the jet engines. That ridge, There's another cache. My prototypes are in a cave system up there. If you bomb it, you destroy $50 million of proprietary technology. Elena froze. She slowly turned her head to look at him. The battle below was still raging. Miller and the SEALs were using the air cover to shift positions. But up here, in this slice of hell, time seemed to dilate. "You're worried about money?" Elena asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "My men are bleeding out down there. I'm about to call a danger-close mission that could kill us all if the pilot sneezes. And you are talking about prototypes?" Thorne scrambled to his knees. He reached into his ruined suit jacket. For a second, Elena tensed, hand going to her holster, but he didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a sleek, blood-smeared smartphone. "I can transfer it now," Thorne said, his eyes manic. $5 million. Into any account you want. Crypto, offshore, I don't care. Just call off the jets. Tell them the target is neutralized. We surrender to the militia, I make a call, and we walk away. Everyone lives. You walk away rich. Elena stared at the phone. The screen was cracked, but the light was still on. $5 million. It was more money than a captain made in 10 lifetimes. It was enough to disappear, enough to never smell cordite or rotting garbage again. She looked at Thorne, really looked at him. She saw the desperation of a man who believed that everything in the world, honor, duty, life itself, was a transaction. He didn't see a war, he saw a balance sheet. He didn't see soldiers. He saw employees with a price tag. "You think," Elena said, standing up slowly, exposing herself slightly to the wind, "that you can buy the United States Air Force?" "Everyone has a price, Captain," Thorne hissed, thrusting the phone toward her. "Don't be a martyr. Martyrs are just broke corpses. Think about it. 5 million. Right now." Below them, Miller's voice crackled over the radio. "Viper, this is lead. We are taking flanking fire from the east. We can't move. We need that run now." Elena looked down at her team. They were huddled behind the crumbling walls, outnumbered, outgunned, fighting for each other. They weren't fighting for a paycheck. They were fighting so the man next to them could go home. She looked back at Thorne. She didn't feel anger anymore. She felt a profound, icy clarity. "Hog 1-1, this is Viper," she spoke into the handset, staring directly into Thorne's eyes. "Disregard last adjustment. Danger close authorization is in effect. Target reference point is the cave mouth at grid Echo Tango 80. Ordnance selection, mixed. Burnt it out." Thorne's face went pale. "No." "Copy, Viper," the pilot drawled, his voice tightening with the seriousness of the command. "Cleared hot. Danger close. Keep your heads down." "You stupid bitch!" Thorne lunged. He wasn't trying to grab the radio this time. He was trying to kill her. He realized the money wouldn't work. The transaction had failed. Elena was tired, battered, and dehydrated. But she was a soldier. Thorne was a soft man in a hard world. He swung a wild, clumsy punch. Elena stepped inside his guard, blocked the strike with her forearm, and drove the hard plastic body of the radio handset into his solar plexus. Thorne doubled over, gagging. "That," Elena whispered, leaning close to his ear, "was my counteroffer." The sky ripped open again. The second A-10 roared in, much lower this time. The cannon didn't fire. Instead, a GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munition separated from the wing. The bomb guided silently toward the cave entrance Thorne had been so desperate to protect, the cave that likely held the proof of his treason. Boom. The shockwave knocked them both flat against the rock. A plume of black, Smoke and fire erupted from the ridge, followed by the secondary explosions of stored munitions cooking off inside the cave. Thorne's $50 million and his leverage evaporated in a column of fire. Elena lay on her back, watching the smoke rise. She felt a grim satisfaction, but when she rolled over to check on her prisoner, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Thorne wasn't looking at the explosion, he was looking at her, and in his hand, pulled from an ankle holster while he was on the ground, was a compact 9mm pistol. He wasn't panicked anymore. The assets were gone. The deal was dead. Now there were only loose ends. "You really shouldn't have done that, Elena," Thorne said, his voice barely audible over the ringing aftermath. He raised the gun, leveling it at her chest. "Do you know who I am?" he asked again, the question now a death sentence. Elena's rifle was slung across her back. Her hands were on the radio. She was staring down the barrel of a gun held by the man she had just saved. "Yeah," Elena said, her muscles coiling. "I know exactly who you are." The barrel of the 9mm pistol looked like a tunnel leading straight to hell. At this range, less than 2 meters, Thorne didn't need to be a marksman. He just needed to twitch his finger. "Put the radio down," Thorne ordered, his voice cracking with a mixture of adrenaline and hysteria. The dust from the airstrike was still swirling around them, coating his expensive suit in a layer of gray death. Slowly. Elena didn't move immediately. Her mind was racing, calculating angles, distance, and speed. She was exhausted, her body battered from the climb and the explosion, but her training took over. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Julian," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm, "you point that weapon at a uniformed officer, and there is no lawyer in the world who can save you. This ends one of 2 ways. You put it down, or you die on this rock." "I die?" Thorne laughed, a manic, jagged sound. "You just incinerated my future. You think I'm going back to face a Senate hearing, broke? I am Julian Thorne. I build the shield that protects your ungrateful country." He stepped closer, the gun shaking in his hand. "I own your chain of command, Rossi. I have generals on my payroll who will bury you so deep you'll need a shovel to see the sun. Do you understand? You are nothing, a tool, a disposable asset." Elena's hand was still gripping the handset of the ANPRC-117G. Her thumb hovered over the push-to-talk button. She didn't let go. Instead, she pressed it down. "You're admitting to bribing federal officers and trafficking arms," Elena said, her eyes locked on his. "That's treason." "It's business," Thorne screamed, closing the distance. "And you just bankrupted me." He didn't shoot. He wanted to hurt her. He wanted to assert the dominance he felt he had lost when she called in the airstrike against his orders. The gun was power, but physical violence was the only way his shattered ego could express itself. Thorne lunged. He didn't fire the weapon. He used his free hand to shove her violently backwards. "Do you know who I am?" he roared, the veins in his neck bulging. The force of the shove caught Elena off balance. Her boots slipped on the loose shale. She slammed hard against the jagged edge of the outcrop, the air leaving her lungs in a painful whoosh. Her helmet knocked against the stone, momentarily stunning her. The drop behind her was 50 feet straight down into the wadi. Thorne loomed over her, blocking out the sun. He raised the pistol, aiming for her face. "I am the man who decides if you live or die." He spat, but he had made a fatal error. He had closed the distance. Elena didn't beg. She didn't flinch. She looked up at him, her eyes cold and hard as flint. "You're just a target," she whispered. As Thorn tightened his grip on the trigger, Elena moved. It wasn't the desperate scramble of a victim. It was the precise, explosive coil of a viper striking. She batted his gun hand aside with her left forearm, the shot going wide and cracking into the rock next to her ear. Simultaneously, she drove her right boot into his kneecap. Bone crunched. Thorn screamed, his leg buckling under him. He collapsed forward, right into Elena's space. She didn't stop. She grabbed his wrist, the one holding the gun, and twisted it outward with a torque that threatened to snap the radius. Thorn shrieked, dropping the weapon. It clattered onto the stones and skittered over the edge of the cliff. Elena rolled, reversing their positions. She pinned him to the ground, her forearm crushing against his windpipe. Thorn thrashed, clawing at her face, his fingernails digging into her cheek. But he was fighting a woman who did pull-ups with 60 pounds of gear. He was soft. He was weak. "Stop! Stop!" Thorn gurgled, his face turning purple. Elena leaned in, her weight pressing him into the sharp gravel. She grabbed her radio handset, which was still keyed. "Hog 1-1, Viper," she panted into the mic, staring down at Thorn. "Did you copy that transmission?" The pilot's voice came back, crystal clear and devoid of humor. "Copy, Viper. We heard every word. Confirmed hostile intent by the package. You are cleared to neutralize the threat." Thorn's eyes went wide as he heard the voice from the sky. He stopped struggling. He realized with dawning horror that his confession and his threat had been broadcast to the pilots and likely recorded on the flight data recorder. You were broadcasting," Thorn whispered. "I told you," Elena said, easing the pressure on his throat just enough so he didn't pass out. "I'm the one holding the leash." She reached down, unclipped a zip tie from her vest, and jerked his hands behind his back. Thorn sobbed, broken not by the pain, but by the absolute totality of his defeat. He had shoved her, thinking she was just a barrier to his profit. He hadn't realized she was the anchor keeping him from falling into the abyss. "Viper to lead," Elena radioed Miller, her voice returning to its professional cadence. "The package is secured. Threat neutralized. We are holding the high ground." "Copy that, Viper," Miller's voice came through, breathless but relieved. "Good timing. That bomb broke their back. The militia is retreating. We're moving up to your position. Check your 6. Elena sat back on her heels, watching the smoke drift up from the valley floor. Her face was bleeding, her ribs ached, and her uniform was torn. Thorn lay face down in the dirt, weeping quietly. She picked up her rifle and scanned the horizon. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the heavy, leaden weight of exhaustion. But her hands were steady. She looked at the spot where Thorn had shoved her. It was close. Too close. If she had been a second slower, or if he had been a second faster, she would be broken at the bottom of the ravine. But if didn't matter in war. Only is mattered. And right now, she was alive. "Get up!" She kicked Thorn's boot. "The helo is coming, and you have a date with a court-martial." Thorn didn't move. He just lay there, defeated by a woman he hadn't even considered a player in his game. Elena looked up as the A-10s banked one last time, dipping their wings in a salute before turning back toward the base. "Thanks, boys," she whispered. But the silence that followed the jets was heavy. The battle was over, but the war, the one against the lies, the politics, and the men like Thorn, was just beginning. And Elena had a feeling that surviving the valley was the easy part. The mountain didn't just shake, it groaned. A deep, tectonic complaint that vibrated through the soles of Elena's boots and into her teeth. The GBU-38J dam had impacted the cave mouth less than 80 meters from their position. In the world of precision munitions, that was a direct hit. In the world of human fragility, it was being inside a drum while a giant beat it with a sledgehammer. Elena lay flat on the outcrop, shielding Thorn's body with her own. Not out of mercy, but out of protocol. He was cargo now. Cargo didn't get to die until the paperwork was signed. Debris rained down like a meteor shower. Sharp shards of shale, fist-sized rocks, and burning embers formed the secondary explosions inside the cave clattered against her helmet and plate carrier. The air was instantly sucked out of the immediate area, replaced by a wall of heat and the acrid, biting smell of high explosives mixed with chemically treated rocket fuel. "Stay down," Elena yelled, though she couldn't hear her own voice over the ringing in her ears. Thorn was screaming into the dirt, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his body twitching with every secondary boom that echoed from the destroyed cache. But the symphony of destruction wasn't over. "Viper Hog 1-1, tally on the infantry and the Wadi, cleared hot, guns, guns, guns!" The radio crackle was the only warning. The two A-10s circled back, their noses pointed down at the valley floor where the militia had been advancing toward the SEAL's position in the shepherd's hut. "Bert!" The sound tore the sky in half. From her vantage point, Elena watched physics break down. The 30mm rounds from the GAU-8 Avenger cannon didn't just hit the ground, they churned it. The dry riverbed erupted into a geyser of dirt, rock, and pink mist. The enemy combatants who hadn't been buried by the landslide were vaporized by the depleted uranium. It was efficient, terrifying, and total. The vibration was so intense that the outcrop Elena was lying on shifted. A crack appeared in the granite, widening rapidly. "We have to move!" Elena grabbed Thorn by the collar of his ruined suit. "The shelf is collapsing!" She hauled him up. Thorn was dead weight, his legs jelly. She didn't have time for his trauma. She shoved him toward the path leading down. "Move or die, Thorn! Move!" They scrambled down the scree slope, sliding more than walking. Dust billowed up in choking clouds, reducing visibility to zero. The world was gray, gray dirt, gray smoke, gray skin. As they reached the bottom, Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked toward the shepherd's hut, where she had left Miller and the team. The hut was gone. In its place was a pile of rubble. The shock wave from the GBU-38 had compromised the ancient mud brick walls, and the vibration from the gun run had finished the job. The roof had caved in completely. "Miller!" Elena screamed, dropping Thorn in the dirt and sprinting toward the ruins. "Miller! Smitty!" There was no answer. Just the settling of dust and the distant drone of the jets pulling off target. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the adrenaline. She had called that strike. She had authorized danger close. If her men were dead under those bricks, it was her finger on the trigger. She reached the pile of debris and started digging frantically with her hands, tearing at the jagged stones. "Sound off! Anyone! Sound off!" A cough. A wet, hacking sound from beneath a slab of timber. "Over here!" Elena scrambled toward the sound. She grabbed the edge of a heavy beam and heaved, straining every muscle in her back. "I've got you! Push!" The beam shifted, and a dusty, helmeted head emerged. It was Smitty, the saw gunner. His face was caked in blood from a cut above his eye, and he was coughing up black phlegm. "I'm good. I'm good," Smitty wheezed, crawling out of the hole. He dragged his machine gun with him, refusing to let go of the weapon. Roof came down. Hit Miller. Check Miller. Elena dove back into the hole. Miller. I'm here, Viper. A voice groaned from deeper in the pocket. Get your boot off my hand. Elena nearly wept with relief. She reached down and grabbed Miller's vest, helping him drag himself out of the tomb. He was limping heavily, and his left arm hung at an awkward angle, but he was alive. Status? Elena asked, her hands checking him for arterial bleeding. Dislocated shoulder. Miller gritted out, his face pale under the grime. And I think I swallowed half of Afghanistan, but we're green. No KIA. He looked around at the moonscape surrounding them. The enemy force was simply gone, erased. That was too close, Viper, Miller said, looking at her. There was no accusation in his eyes, just the hard truth of the profession. Another 10 meters, and we'd be part of the geology. I know, Elena whispered. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. I had no choice. You made the call, Miller said, popping his good shoulder against the wall to steady himself. We're alive. That's the only metric that counts. Elena turned back to where she had dumped Thorn. He was sitting in the dirt, staring up at the ridge. The cave mouth was still burning. Thick, oily black smoke poured out of it, staining the pristine blue sky. Occasional pops and flashes indicated that the ammunition inside was still cooking off. Thorn wasn't looking at the dead militia. He wasn't looking at the SEALs he had almost gotten killed. He was staring at the fire with the hollow, 1,000-yard stare of a man watching his house burn down with his family inside. But it wasn't a family. It was his leverage, his prototypes, his evidence, his immunity. Elena walked over to him. She stood over him, her shadow casting a long line across his face. It's gone, Julian, she said softly. All of it. Thorn looked up at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face streaked with tears and snot. He looked pathetic, small. You have no idea what you've done, Thorn whispered, his voice raspy. That wasn't just missiles. That was the future. That was a war crime in a box, Elena corrected him. And now it's just slag. She reached down and checked his zip ties. They were tight. Do you feel that? She asked, gesturing to the silence of the valley. That's the sound of you not being dead. You should try being grateful. Thorn laughed, a weak, broken sound. Grateful? You think this is over? You think you can just arrest me and go home? You just started a war you can't win, Captain. The people I work for, they don't do court-martials. They do car bombs. Elena knelt down so she was eye level with him. She grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at the devastation. Look at that valley, Thorn. Look at the bodies. Look at the crater. She leaned in close. I just dropped 500 pounds of high explosive on my own position to kill the men you sold weapons to. I almost buried my team to stop you. She released his chin with a shove. If you think I'm scared of a lawsuit or a hitman after this, you really don't know who I am. She stood up and turned to Miller. Check the men. Hydrate. We have 10 mics before the extraction birds arrive. I want this LZ secured. Copy that, Miller said, favoring his bad arm. Elena walked a few paces away, toward the edge of the blast zone. The ground was hot beneath her boots. The air smelled of sulfur and death. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the toxic air of survival. She had survived the danger close. Now she just had to survive the peace. The silence following an airstrike is deceptive. It feels like peace, but it is merely the inhalation before the scream. Viper, this is Pedro 6-1, the radio crackled, the voice of the rescue pilot cutting through the static. "We are 2 mics out. I see your smoke. Be advised, we are running low on playtime. We need a cold LZ or we are waving off." Elena checked her wrist compass. The designated landing zone was a flat patch of hard-packed earth 200 meters south, away from the debris field of the shepherd's hut. It wasn't far, but in their condition, it might as well have been a marathon. "Copy, Pedro. LZ is hot but suppressed," Elena replied, her voice hoarse. "We are moving now. Green smoke popping in 3. She turned to her team. Miller was leaning heavily against a remnant of a wall, his face gray, clutching his dislocated shoulder. Smitty was reloading his saw with his final belt, scanning the ridges with paranoid intensity. And then there was Thorne. He was still on his knees, staring at the smoldering mouth of the cave where his empire had just vaporized. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even blinking. "Get up, Thorne," Elena ordered, grabbing his arm. Thorne didn't budge. He was dead weight. "No," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the smoke. "We have to check it. There might be something left. A drive. A casing. I need to see." "There is nothing left but melted rock and treason," Elena snapped. "We are leaving, now." "I'm not going!" Thorne screamed suddenly, the shock breaking into hysteria. He tried to scramble back toward the burning ruins, fighting against the zip ties. "You can't make me leave. If I go back without proof, they'll kill me. I need the chips." He was thrashing, kicking up dust, making a scene in the middle of a kill zone. "Smitty!" Elena barked. The saw gunner turned, his patience exhausted hours ago. He didn't ask questions. He slung his machine gun, marched over to Thorne, and delivered a short, precise strike with the buttstock of his weapon to the back of Thorne's head. Not enough to kill, but enough to shut down the operating system. Thorne slumped forward, unconscious. "He's luggage now," Smitty grunted. He bent down and hoisted the limp man over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, groaning under the weight. "Heavy luggage." "Miller, can you move?" Elena asked, moving to the team leader's side. "I'm walking," Miller gritted out, sweat carving tracks through the grime on his face. "Just don't ask me to dance." "Move out. Wedge formation. I've got point," Elena said, raising her rifle. They moved across the open ground. It was the most dangerous part of the extraction. Exposed, slow, and exhausted. Elena scanned the ridges. The enemy was gone, wiped out by the A-10s, but she knew how these mountains worked. There were always eyes, always reinforcements. The sound of rotors began as a thumping in the chest before it registered in the ears. 2 HH-60G Pavehawks swept over the canyon wall, flaring hard as they approached the LZ. They were ugly, beautiful beasts, bristling with miniguns and rescue hoists. "Pop smoke!" Elena yelled. Miller pulled the pin on a green smoke grenade and tossed it. The rotor wash caught the emerald cloud, whipping it into a violent vortex. The lead helicopter came in for a brown-out landing, engulfed in its own dust cloud. The pilot was flying on instruments, trusting the radar altimeter as visibility dropped to 0. The wheels touched down with a heavy thud. The side doors slid open. 2 pararescue men, PJs, leaped out, weapons raised, moving with the fluid aggression of men whose job was to steal souls back from the Reaper. "Go, go, go!" A PJ screamed over the roar of the engines, waving them forward. Elena grabbed Miller's good arm, guiding him through the blinding dust. The sand felt like sandpaper against her skin, stinging her eyes. They reached the door, and the PJs grabbed Miller, hauling him inside the cabin. Smitty was next, dumping Thorne onto the floor deck like a sack of wet cement. "That the package?" the PJ shouted, looking at the zip-tied, unconscious man in the ruined suit. "That's the cargo," Elena yelled back. "Secure him!" She climbed in last, her boots slipping on the metal floor. As soon as she was clear of the door, the crew chief yelled into his mic, "Load is on! Dust off! Dust off!" The Pavehawk lurched upward, the engines screaming as they fought for lift in the thin mountain air. The ground fell away, the dust clearing to reveal the scar they had left on the valley. Elena slumped against the cabin wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She plugged her headset into the internal comms system. The sudden transition from the chaotic noise of the battlefield to the muffled hum of the intercom was disorienting. "Viper, this is Pedro Lead. Vital signs on your team?" "Miller is code yellow, dislocated shoulder," Elena reported, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. "Thorn is subdued. The rest are green." She looked across the cabin. A PJ was already working on Miller, cutting away his sleeve to stabilize the joint. Smitty was sitting with his head back, eyes closed, hugging his machine gun. Thorn was strapped to a litter, unconscious and pathetic. Elena turned her head to look out the gunner's window. The valley was shrinking below them. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the Hindu Kush. She looked at the site of the airstrike. The cave mouth was a black smudge against the brown earth. But as she watched, a secondary explosion rippled through the lingering smoke. It wasn't the bright orange of high explosives. A thick, heavy plume of gas erupted from the ground. It was a sickly, dense yellow-green. It didn't dissipate in the wind like normal smoke. It hugged the ground, flowing like water down into the wadi. Chlorine? Mustard gas? Sarin? Elena's blood ran cold. Thorn hadn't just been selling missiles. He had been storing chemical weapons. The prototypes he was so worried about weren't chips. They were delivery systems for something far worse. She looked at Thorn's sleeping face. He knew. He knew exactly what was in that cave. If she hadn't called the airstrike, those weapons would have been moved. They would have been used. "Pedro led," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mark Grid Echo Tango 80. Hazmat protocol. Confirm secondary detonation with chemical signature." The pilot paused. "Copy that, Viper. We see it." "Jesus, yellow smoke confirmed." That's not good." Elena leaned her head back against the vibration of the fuselage. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her shaking and hollow. She closed her eyes, but she could still see the yellow smoke crawling over the dead earth. They were out. They were safe. But she realized with a sinking feeling that the extraction wasn't the end of the mission. It was just the transport to the crime scene, and she was the only witness. "We're going home, boys," she whispered to no one. But as the helicopter banked toward Bagram, Elena knew that home wasn't going to be safe either. Not with what she knew, not with who Thorn was. The war in the valley was over. The war in the shadows had just begun. The transition from the war to the peace was not a gradient, it was a guillotine. The HH-60G Pavehawk touched down at Bagram Airfield under the cover of twilight. The rotors were still spinning down when the side doors slid open. Elena expected medics. She expected a trauma team for Miller's shoulder. Instead, she saw a row of immaculate uniforms and dark suits. Military police MPs stood in a semicircle, their postures rigid. Behind them was a black SUV with tinted windows, the engine running. "Captain Rossi!" A major she didn't recognize shouted over the dying whine of the engine. He stepped forward, flanked by two MPs. "You are to come with us immediately." Do not speak to anyone. Do not pass go. Elena unbuckled her harness. She looked at Miller, who was being helped onto a stretcher by the PJs. Miller looked at the welcoming committee, then at Elena. His eyes narrowed. He knew a burial detail when he saw one. "Viper," Miller grunted, pain etching lines around his mouth. "Watch your six. This smells wrong." "I get the shoulder fixed, Miller," Elena said, forcing a reassuring nod. "I'll see you on the other side." She stepped onto the tarmac. The heat of the day had vanished, replaced by a biting wind. Before she could take 2 steps toward the medical vehicle, the major blocked her path. "This way, Captain," he said, gesturing toward a nondescript gray sedan, not the SUV. Elena watched as the PJs unloaded Thorne. He wasn't handcuffed. He wasn't being treated like a prisoner. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out of the black SUV, shook Thorne's hand, and guided him into the plush leather interior. Thorne looked back at Elena just once before the door closed. He didn't smile. He just looked managed, protected. "He is a detainee," Elena said, her voice rising. "He is a witness to a war crime. You can't just let him drive off." "That is outside your purview, Captain," the major said coldly. "Hand over your sidearm and your radio. Now." Elena felt the blood flush in her cheeks. To be disarmed on the flight line like a criminal was an insult that cut deeper than any shrapnel. Slowly, deliberately, she unholstered her M9 Beretta. She dropped the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed the weapon to the MP. Next came the radio, her voice, her lifeline. "Get in the car," the major ordered. The ride to the command building was silent. The base looked the same as it had that morning. Soldiers walking to the chow hall, Humvees patrolling. But to Elena, it felt like a foreign planet. She was no longer a predator in the ecosystem. She was the prey. They led her to a debriefing room in the intelligence wing. It was a small, windowless box with fluorescent lights that hummed at a headache-inducing frequency. The air conditioning was cranked down to meat locker temperatures, freezing the sweat and grime on her skin. She sat at a metal table for 20 minutes, alone. No water, no medical check, just the hum and the cold. Finally, the door opened. Colonel Holloway walked in. He looked tired, his uniform rumpled. Behind him was the man in the charcoal suit who had met Thorne, Mr. Sterling, General Counsel for Horizon Defense. Holloway didn't look her in the eye. He sat down and placed a digital recorder on the table. "This interview is being recorded regarding the events of Operation Sidewinder," Holloway claimed, his voice flat. "Captain Elena Rossi, present. Mr. Arthur Sterling, representing the civilian contractor, present as an observer." "Observer?" Elena scoffed. "Since when do civilians sit in on operational debriefs, Colonel?" "Since the mission involved the destruction of $50 million of classified government assets," Sterling answered smoothly. His voice was like oiled silk. "Mr. Thorne has made some very serious allegations, Captain. He claims you panicked, that you called in an airstrike on a peaceful negotiation." Elena stared at him, incredulous. "Negotiation? We were taking mortar. Fire. We were bracketed. Thorne was selling Igla-S missiles to the insurgents. I saw the crates. I saw the launchers." Sterling opened a leather folder. "Mr. Thorne claims those crates contained humanitarian aid and communication infrastructure. He claims he was meeting with local leaders to secure safe passage for food supplies. He says you assaulted him, held him hostage, and then, in a fit of hysteria, leveled the site to cover up your tactical incompetence." "Hysteria?" Elena repeated the word, tasting the bile. I am a JTAC with 3 combat tours. I don't do hysteria. I do precision fires. And the aid you're talking about? It cooked off. Aid doesn't explode, and it certainly doesn't release chlorine gas. Holloway looked up sharply. Gas? Secondary detonation, Elena said, locking eyes with her commanding officer. Yellow smoke, heavy density. It was a chemical stockpile, Colonel. Thorne wasn't just running guns. He was moving WMD components. That cave was a hazmat site. The room went silent. Sterling didn't flinch. He just wrote something down on his legal pad. Did anyone else see this gas? Sterling asked. My pilot saw it. The PJ saw it. It's on the flight logs. Flight logs can be interpreted in many ways, Sterling said dismissively. Fuel vapor often looks yellow under certain lighting conditions. And given your concussion— I don't have a concussion, Elena snapped. Mr. Thorne says you were acting erratic, paranoid. Sterling smiled, a thin, predatory expression. He says you threatened to kill him. He drew a weapon on me. Elena slammed her hand on the table. He shoved me on the ridge. It's all on the tape. She pointed to her helmet, which she had placed on the floor next to her chair. The GoPro mount was still attached. I had an open mic, Elena said, her voice steadying. The A-10 pilots heard everything, and the camera was rolling. It shows the missiles. It shows him pulling the gun. It shows everything. Holloway looked at the helmet. He looked at Sterling. A silent communication passed between them, a look of calculation that made Elena's stomach drop. Captain, Holloway said quietly, place the helmet on the table. Elena hesitated. Sir, that footage is evidence. It needs to be logged by CID. I am your commanding officer, Holloway said, his voice hardening. Place the helmet on the table. That is a direct order. Elena felt the trap snapping shut. If she refused, it was insubordination. If she complied, the evidence would vanish. Slowly, she lifted the helmet. She unclipped the camera unit. She held the small black square in her hand. It weighed nothing, but it held the weight of her entire life. She placed it on the metal surface. Holloway picked it up. He didn't give it to a clerk. He slid it into his own pocket. This material will be reviewed by the investigative committee, Holloway said, not meeting her eyes. Until then, it is classified top secret. You are not to discuss the content of that video with anyone. Not your team. Not your family. Not a lawyer. You're burying it, Elena whispered. You're burying the truth to save a contractor. We are protecting national interests, Sterling corrected her. Scandals lose wars, Captain, and right now, you are a scandal waiting to happen. Holloway stood up. Captain Rossi, you are hereby relieved of duty pending an Article 32 investigation into charges of reckless endangerment, assault on a civilian, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Sir, you are confined to quarters, Holloway interrupted, his voice devoid of emotion. You will surrender your access badge and your comms. If you leave the base perimeter, you will be arrested for desertion. Do I make myself clear? Elena looked at the man she had respected for years. She saw the shame in his eyes, but she also saw the fear. Thorne's reach was longer than the chain of command. She stood up. She felt light, untethered. She stripped the Velcro patch with her call sign, Viper, from her shoulder sleeve and placed it on the table next to the recorder. Crystal clear, Colonel, she said. She turned and walked to the door. Captain, Sterling called out as she reached the handle. Mr. Thorne wanted me to convey his gratitude. He said you were very professional, considering your limitations. Elena stopped. She didn't turn around. Tell Mr. Thorne, she said to the steel door, that I'm not done. She walked out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, harsher. She was alone. No gun, no radio, no team. But as she walked toward the barracks, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the memory of the yellow smoke, and the certainty that if she didn't fight back, the next time that smoke appeared, it wouldn't be in a remote valley in Afghanistan. It would be somewhere much closer to home. The containerized housing unit, CHU, was a 10 by 10 metal box that smelled of stale pine cleaner and recycled air. It was designed to keep soldiers safe from the elements, but for the last 48 hours, it had been Elena's prison. She sat on the edge of the narrow cot, her eyes fixed on the small television mounted in the corner. It was tuned to a global news network, and the face on the screen made her stomach churn with a mixture of nausea and rage. It was a spokesperson for Horizon Defense. Standing in front of a sleek podium in Washington, D.C., the chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Tragedy in the Hindu Kush. Contractor convoy attacked." Mr. Thorne is currently recovering at a private facility in Germany, the spokesperson said, his face a mask of practiced concern. He is shaken but grateful to be alive. Horizon Defense remains committed to its humanitarian mission in the region, delivering vital communication infrastructure to underserved communities. It is unfortunate that a breakdown in military command and control led to the loss of these critical assets. Elena turned off the TV. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Breakdown in command and control. That was the narrative. Not illegal arms deal, not chemical weapons, just a bureaucratic euphemism for the captain screwed up. There was a sharp knock at the door. It wasn't the rhythmic pounding of the MPs this time. It was hesitant. "Enter," Elena said, not standing up. The door opened, and a young captain stepped in. He wore the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, JAG. He looked like he had been out of law school for about 15 minutes. He held a briefcase like a shield. "Captain Rossi," he said, adjusting his glasses. "I'm Captain Levin. I've been assigned as your defense counsel for the Article 32 hearing." Elena looked him over. He was nervous. That was bad. You didn't want a nervous lawyer when you were facing the full weight of the military-industrial complex. "You look like you've already lost, Captain Levin," Elena said dryly. "Don't sit down. Just give me the damage report." Levin blinked, then closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He opened his briefcase on the small desk and pulled out a stack of files. "It's aggressive, ma'am. The prosecution is pushing for a general court-martial. The charges are reckless endangerment, destruction of government property, and assault on a civilian protected person. Horizon Defense is also filing a civil suit for the value of the cargo." "The cargo was missiles," Elena said, standing up and pacing the small space. "And chlorine gas. Did you tell them that?" "I did," Levin said, his voice dropping. "But the investigative report from the site survey came back this morning. The crater analysis was inconclusive. The secondary explosions destroyed any physical evidence of the alleged contraband. The official report lists the cargo as electronic components and industrial cleaning supplies." Elena stopped pacing. "Cleaning supplies? That's their cover for the gas?" "It fits the chemical signature found in the soil, technically," Levin said, looking at his shoes. "Without a sample or photographic evidence, it's your word against the manifest." "I have video," Elena said, stepping closer to him. "My helmet cam. Colonel Holloway took it." Levin sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had hit a brick wall. "I requested that footage during discovery. The prosecution states that the file was corrupted during the download process. The data is unrecoverable. Elena felt a cold chill spread through her chest. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was an erasure. They had deleted the truth. "What about Miller?" Elena asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Master Sergeant Miller. He was there. He saw the man pads. He saw Thorne pull the gun. Get him on the stand." Levin hesitated, pulling another document from his stack. He held it out to her. "The SEAL team has been rotated out. They are back in the States." "So? Subpoena them." "I can't," Levin said softly. "They signed sworn statements before they left." Elena snatched the paper from his hand. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, looking for Miller's signature at the bottom. The statement was brief, vague, and devastating. The tactical situation was chaotic. Visibility was 0. Cannot confirm the nature of the cargo. Captain Rossi appeared under extreme duress. "They didn't write this," Elena whispered. "Miller wouldn't write this." "They were facing charges too, Captain," Levin explained, his tone sympathetic but defeated. "The prosecution threatened to charge the entire team as accessories to the destruction of property. They were offered immunity and honorable discharges in exchange for these statements and signing a non-disclosure agreement regarding the operation." Elena crumpled the paper in her fist. They had squeezed Miller. They had threatened the pensions, the careers, and the families of her team. Miller had done the only thing a leader could do. He took the deal to save his men. He sacrificed her to protect the pack. She couldn't blame him, but it broke her heart all the same. "So I'm alone," Elena said, tossing the crumpled ball of paper onto the cot. "Technically, you have me," Levin said weakly. "But, yes, without the video and without the witnesses, the narrative is entirely controlled by Thorne. They are painting you as a rogue operator who snapped under pressure. They want to make an example of you to appease the contractor lobby." "What's the offer?" Elena asked. She knew there was always an offer. "Plead guilty to a lesser charge of dereliction of duty," Levin said. "You accept a general discharge under honorable conditions. No prison time. You lose your commission, your benefits, and your clearance. But you walk away free." "I walk away branded a liar and a failure," Elena corrected him, "while Thorne sells chemical weapons to the next highest bidder." "It's the best I can do, Captain," Levin said. "If we go to trial, you're looking at 20 years in Leavenworth." Elena walked to the small mirror bolted to the wall. She looked at her reflection. She was still wearing her flight suit, but she had ripped the patches off. She looked like a ghost. "I need time," Elena said. "The hearing is in 48 hours, Levin said, closing his briefcase. "I'll need your answer by tomorrow morning. Think about it, Elena. You can't fight the system when the system is the weapon." Levin left. The lock clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the empty room. Elena sat back down on the cot. The darkness of the room seemed to press in on her. She had followed every rule. She had protected her team. She had stopped a massacre. And her reward was a cage. She reached under the pillow of the cot. She had managed to keep one thing. Not her military-issue phone. That was gone. But an old, personal tablet she used for reading books. It had no SIM card, just Wi-Fi capability, and she had kept it hidden in her laundry bag during the search. She hadn't turned it on, afraid the signal would be detected. But now? What did it matter? She powered it up. The screen glowed blue in the dim light. She connected to the base's open morale network, insecure, monitored, but available. Immediately, a notification pinged. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a message app. It was a direct file transfer request via a peer-to-peer protocol she hadn't installed. Sender, unknown, file name, look, closer, A-10. Elena stared at the screen. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Who knew she had this device? Who knew she was online right now? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then tapped accept. The file downloaded instantly. It was small, a text file and an image. She opened the text file first. It contained just 3 words. I kept a copy. She opened the image. It was a still frame. Grainy, low light, but unmistakable. It was from a helmet camera, but not hers. The angle was lower, from a seated position. It was from the perspective of the saw gunner. Smitty. The image showed Thorne standing on the ridge, the pistol in his hand clearly visible, leveled at Elena. And in the background, illuminated by the burning truck, the shattered crate of missiles was clearly legible. Elena put a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. Smitty. The quiet one. The one who carried the heaviest gun. He hadn't wiped his card. He had smuggled the footage out before they scrubbed him. The narrative wasn't sealed. There was a leak. And for the first time in 2 days, Elena didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a hunter who had just found a blood trail. The download bar crawled across the screen of the cheap tablet like a dying insect. 90%. 95. Done. Elena sat cross-legged on her cot, a blanket pulled over her head to mask the blue glow of the screen from the gap under the door. The air inside the makeshift tent was stale, recycled, and hot with the heat of her own breath. The file Look Closer A-10 was a dense, encrypted archive. Smitty hadn't just sent a picture, he had sent a raw data dump. But without a key, it was just digital noise. A text box appeared on the peer-to-peer app. No sender name. Just a cursor blinking. Password? Elena stared at it. Smitty was smart. He wouldn't send the key over the same channel as the file. If the network sniffers caught the file, they'd catch the key, and the evidence would be useless. He was relying on something only they knew. She thought back to the deployment. The inside jokes, the call signs. Then she remembered the extraction. The way Smitty had hugged his machine gun like a teddy bear. The name etched into the stock of his weapon. She typed, Lucille. Access denied. She frowned. Think like a paranoid SEAL who just stole classified data. She tried the date of the ambush. 25/1/25. Access denied. Sweat pricked at her hairline. 3 strikes and most encryption software locked you out or deleted the file. She had 1 try left. She closed her eyes and replayed the mission. The moment on the ridge. The A-10s, the pilot's voice. Keep your heads down, darlin'. Smitty had laughed at that in the helo. He had called it the angel's lullaby. She typed, Hog 1-1, decrypting. The screen flashed green. A folder opened, revealing 3 video files stamped with time codes and the serial number of a standard issue helmet camera. Elena put her earbuds in, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just watching a movie. This was committing a felony. Viewing classified combat footage on an unauthorized device was a violation of the Espionage Act. If Holloway walked in right now, she wouldn't just be discharged. She'd be in handcuffs for 20 years. She tapped the second file. Time, 14:45 Zulu. The video jerked into life. The angle was low, stabilized by the chest mount. It showed Smitty's gloved hands gripping the saw, the barrel resting on a crumbling wall. The audio was crisp, the crack thump of distant gunfire. Miller's voice shouting orders. Viper is moving up! Cover her! The camera panned up. Elena saw herself, a small, armored figure dragging Thorne up the shale slope. It was surreal to watch herself from the outside, to see the desperate urgency in her movements that she hadn't felt in the moment. The camera zoomed in. Smitty had a variable optic on his helmet cam, a piece of kit he'd bought with his own money. Elena watched as she and Thorne reached the outcrop. She saw the argument. She couldn't hear the words over the distance, but the body language was violent. Then, the moment of truth. The airstrike hit the cave. The camera shook violently as Smitty ducked. Dust obscured the lens. He wiped it clear. The camera refocused on the outcrop. Elena held her breath. On the small screen, Thorne was standing over her. He was shouting. And then, clear as day, pixel perfect in the high-definition footage, he reached into his ankle holster. The sun glinted off the slide of the pistol. He pointed it at her head. He shoved her. Elena exhaled, a sound that was half sob. It was there. Irrefutable proof, self-defense. The assault on a civilian charge was dead, but the video didn't stop. Smitty's camera panned back to the burning truck and the cave mouth as the yellow smoke began to billow out. "Gas! Gas! Gas!" someone yelled on the recording. Elena paused the video. She pinched the screen to zoom in. The frame was centered on the wreckage of the white box truck before the secondary explosion consumed it entirely. One of the wooden crates had been split open by the initial RPG impact. She had seen the missiles, but she hadn't looked closely at the packing straw. Inside the crate, nestled next to the missile tube, was a metal canister. It was painted drab olive, but there were markings stenciled in yellow paint. Elena's heart stopped. She knew those markings. Every officer in NATO was briefed on them during CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear training. OB-84. It wasn't just chlorine. It wasn't mustard gas. It was a binary precursor for a fourth-generation nerve agent, a variant of Novichok. Elena sat back, the tablet slipping from her fingers onto the blanket. The implications crashed into her like a physical blow. Thorne wasn't just a greedy contractor selling surplus missiles to warlords. He was moving strategic-level chemical weapons. If this got out, it wouldn't just ruin Horizon Defense. It would topple the administration that hired them. It would start a geopolitical firestorm with the country of origin. That's why Holloway buried it. That's why Sterling was so confident. They weren't protecting Thorne. They were containing a global catastrophe, and she was the leak they needed to plug. Elena looked at the tablet. It wasn't a lifeline anymore. It was a radioactive isotope. Possession of this image proved she knew the state secret they were killing to hide. Footsteps echoed outside the CHU, heavy boots on gravel. They stopped right outside her door. Elena scrambled, shoving the tablet under her mattress, deep into the springs. She threw the blanket off her head and grabbed a paperback book, sitting up just as the handle turned. The lock disengaged. It wasn't Holloway. It wasn't an MP. It was Captain Levin, her JAG lawyer. He slipped inside quickly, closing the door and locking it behind him. He looked pale, sweating despite the chill of the room. "Levin?" Elena whispered. "What are you doing here? It's after curfew." Levin leaned against the door, clutching his briefcase to his chest. He looked at her, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "I found something," Levin hissed. "In the discovery files. They made a mistake. A redaction error." "Keep your voice down," Elena warned, standing up. "They didn't just delete your helmet cam footage, Elena," Levin said, his voice trembling. "They wiped the flight data recorder from the A-10s. Both of them. Claimed a software malfunction during maintenance." "I know," Elena said. "They're scrubbing everything." "No, you don't understand." Levin stepped closer. I have a friend in maintenance. He told me the recorders weren't wiped. They were pulled, physically removed by a civilian contractor an hour after the birds landed. Sterling, Elena said. If they have the recorders, they have the audio, Levin said. They know you're innocent, and they are proceeding with the court-martial anyway. Elena looked at the young lawyer. He was terrified, but he was here. He was crossing the line. Captain Levin, Elena said softly, are you prepared to commit a felony to win this case? Levin swallowed hard. I took an oath to the Constitution, not to Horizon Defense. Elena nodded. She reached under the mattress and pulled out the tablet. The blue light illuminated both their faces. Then you better look at this, she said. Because we aren't just fighting for my career anymore. We're sitting on a war crime. Levin looked at the paused image of the canister. He looked at the markings. Oh my God, he whispered. We can't use this in court, Elena said. It's inadmissible, obtained illegally, classified secret. If we show this to the judge, we both go to jail. So what do we do? Levin asked, looking from the screen to her. Elena turned off the tablet. The room plunged back into darkness. We don't show it to the judge, Elena said, her voice hard. We show it to the one person Thorne can't buy. Who? The pilot, Elena said. Major Vance, Hog 1-1. If he testifies to what he saw, to what he heard, they can't bury a field-grade officer with combat wings. Vance is in the wind, Levin said. His squadron rotated to Qatar yesterday. Then we need to get a message to Qatar, Elena said. And I need my radio back. 800 hours. The hallway of the Bagram Legal Center was long, sterile, and echoed with the sound of polished boots hitting linoleum. It was a sound Elena knew well, the rhythm of bureaucracy, distinct from the rhythm of war. She wore her service dress uniform. It felt stiff, the fabric starched to a razor's edge. Her chest was bare of ribbons. They had been removed as part of her confinement protocol, stripping her of her history before the trial even began. Beside her, Captain Levin walked with a new energy. He wasn't the terrified junior lawyer who had sneaked into her room the night before. He was carrying his briefcase like it contained a bomb, which, in a legal sense, it did. Remember, Levin whispered without turning his head. Don't say a word to him. Let him talk. Fear makes people talk. They rounded the corner toward courtroom 1. Julian Thorne was waiting. He stood leaning against the wall next to the double oak doors, flanked by Sterling and 2 private security contractors who looked like they were carved out of granite. Thorne looked impeccable. His suit was midnight blue, his tie a subtle crimson. He didn't look like a man who had been dragged out of a war zone 2 days ago. He looked like he owned the building. As Elena approached, Thorne pushed off the wall and stepped into her path. Captain Rossi, Thorne said, his voice smooth, carrying that fake warmth of a salesman closing a deal. Can we have a moment? Off the record? Levin stepped forward, but Elena put a hand on his arm to stop him. She stopped 3 feet from Thorne. She didn't salute. She didn't speak. She just looked at him. Look, Elena, Thorne sighed, stepping closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We don't have to do this. The theater, the grandstanding, it's embarrassing for everyone. He gestured to Sterling, who pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. This is a revised offer, Thorne said. Honorable discharge, full benefits, and a consulting position with a subsidiary of Horizon Defense. Starting salary is triple what you make now. We call it a security advisory role. You sit in an office, you sign some papers, and you forget about the Hindu Kush. Elena's expression didn't change. She looked at the expensive fabric of his suit, thinking about the yellow smoke staining the dirt in the valley. "You're a smart woman," Thorne pressed, his eyes searching hers for a flicker of greed or fear. "You know how this ends inside that room. The military protects its contracts, not its captains. You walk in there and they will bury you. You'll go to Leavenworth. You'll be a felon. Or you can walk away rich and right." It was the same pitch he had made on the ridge. Money against morality. He genuinely couldn't conceive of a world where someone would choose the latter. Elena looked at the document in Sterling's hand. It was a lifeline. It was safety. It was silence. She looked back at Thorne. For the first time, she saw the fear behind his eyes. He wasn't making this offer out of generosity. He was making it because he knew there was a leak. He didn't know what she had, but he knew she had something. Elena took a breath. The air smelled of floor wax and Thorne's cologne, a scent that tried to cover the rot beneath. She didn't take the paper. She didn't curse him. She simply stepped to the right, maneuvering around him as if he were a piece of furniture in a crowded room. "Excuse me," she said. It was polite, it was dismissal. It was the most insulting thing she could have done. Thorne's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake, Rossi. Do you hear me? You're walking into your own funeral." Elena didn't look back. She pushed open the heavy courtroom doors and walked into the arena. The courtroom was freezing. The air conditioning was working overtime. At the front of the room, behind a raised dais, sat the presiding officer, Colonel Staggs, a man with a reputation for being as hard as the rulebook he enforced. On the prosecution table, the government lawyers had stacks of binders. They looked confident. Levin guided Elena to the defense table. They sat down. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Colonel Staggs took his seat. "Be seated. This Article 32 hearing is convened to assess the charges against Captain Elena Rossi. Prosecution, your opening statement." The lead prosecutor stood up. He painted a picture of a rogue officer, mentally unstable, who had endangered a high-value asset and destroyed critical infrastructure due to panic. It was a compelling story. It was the story Thorne had paid for. When it was Levin's turn, he stood up slowly. He didn't have binders. He had a single flash drive, the result of decrypting the tablet files and transferring them to a secure, admissible format via a jagged loophole Levin had found in the evidentiary code. "Sir," Levin addressed the colonel, "the defense moves to dismiss all charges." Staggs looked over his spectacles. "Captain Levin, this is an evidentiary hearing. You don't just move to dismiss without grounds." "We have grounds, sir," Levin said, his voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. "We have new evidence. Evidence that was previously suppressed by the chain of command." He walked to the clerk's desk and placed the drive on the surface. "Defense Exhibit Alpha," Levin stated. "Recovered helmet camera footage from the extraction team, and a sworn affidavit from Major James Vance, USAF, pilot of Hog 11, obtained via secure uplink from Al Udeid Air Base this morning." A murmur went through the room. Sterling, sitting in the gallery behind the prosecution, stood up abruptly. "Objection!" Sterling shouted, forgetting he was a civilian observer. "This material is classified. It has not been vetted by Horizon Defense for proprietary information." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Staggs barked, banging his gavel. "This is a military court. You have no standing here." Staggs turned his gaze to Levin. "You are accusing the prosecution of suppressing evidence, Captain?" "I am accusing the command of covering up a war crime, sir," Levin said, dropping the nuclear option. The footage on that drive confirms that the infrastructure destroyed by Captain Rossi was, in fact, a stockpile of OB-84 binary chemical agents, and that Mr. Thorne attempted to execute my client to prevent its destruction. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just armed itself. Staggs looked at the drive. He looked at the prosecution table, where the lawyers were frantically whispering to each other. Then he looked at Elena. She sat straight, her spine rigid, her eyes fixed forward. She wasn't looking at the judge for mercy. She was waiting for the truth to land. "Clerk," Staggs said, his voice low and dangerous. "Load the drive." "Sir, the security protocols," the prosecutor stammered. "Load the drive." The clerk plugged it in. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. The video played, the shaky footage of the ridge, the shove, the gun, and then the pause, the zoom, the stencil on the crate, OB-84, the yellow smoke. Staggs watched it all. His face went from impassive to stony granite. He was a JAG, but he was a soldier first. He knew what OB-84 was. The video ended. Staggs took off his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with a microfiber cloth. The sound of the fabric rubbing against the lens was the only noise in the room. He put the glasses back on. He looked past the prosecution, past Levin, past Elena. He looked directly at the gallery, where Julian Thorne was, standing near the exit, his hand frozen on the door handle, looking like a rat caught in a spotlight. "Bailiff," Colonel Staggs said, his voice echoing with the full weight of military justice. "Secure the doors. No one leaves this building." Thorne froze. Elena closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 days. The narrative had just changed. The end of a career doesn't sound like a gavel banging. It sounds like the scratch of a pen on paper. In the hours following the courtroom revelation, the Bagram Legal Center had transformed from a court of law into a crisis management center. The video of the OB-84 markings hadn't just proven Elena's innocence. It had triggered a Tier 1 national security containment protocol. Colonel Staggs had cleared the courtroom. The MPs had locked the doors. And then, the men in the dark suits had arrived. Not the corporate lawyers from Horizon Defense, but the quiet, terrifyingly polite men from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, 6 hours later, Elena sat in Colonel Holloway's office. The blinds were drawn. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and resignation. Across the desk, Holloway pushed a single sheet of paper toward her. It wasn't a charge sheet. It was a separation order. "Medical retirement," Holloway said, his voice lacking its usual command authority. 100% disability rating for TBI and PTSD sustained during combat operations. Honorable discharge. Full pension. Elena looked at the paper. It was a lie. A generous, comfortable lie designed to explain why a decorated captain was leaving the service in the middle of a deployment. "And Thorne?" Elena asked, not reaching for the pen. Holloway looked at the wall. "Mr. Thorne has been recalled. His contract with the Department of Defense has been terminated for cause." "Terminated for cause," Elena repeated dryly. "That's a polite way of saying he's being disappeared to a black site so he can't sell his secrets to anyone else." "Mr. Thorne is no longer your concern, Elena," Holloway said, finally meeting her eyes. There was a deep sadness in them. "The system is cleaning up its own mess. It's ugly, but it's happening. The chemical agents in the valley are being neutralized by a special operations team as we speak. The leak is plugged." "And the truth?" Elena asked. "The fact that he was one of ours?" "The truth is that you saved your team. Holloway said firmly. That is the only truth that will ever leave this room. You sign that paper, you sign the non-disclosure agreement, and you walk away. Free. Elena looked at the pen. It was a heavy, black cross pen. She thought about Miller, nursing his shoulder in the hospital. She thought about Smitty, who had risked prison to send her the file. She thought about the A-10 pilots who had trusted her voice in the dark. She had fought for them. She hadn't fought to change the world or to dismantle the military-industrial complex. She had fought to bring her people home, and they were home. The war against Thorne was over. Continuing to fight the institution would only destroy the victory she had already won. Elena picked up the pen. She signed her name. Captain Elena Rossi. The last time she would ever use that title. She stood up, leaving the paper on the desk. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the subdued Velcro flag patch she had worn on her shoulder for 3 tours. She placed it on top of the resignation letter. "Goodbye, Colonel," she said. Holloway stood up and saluted. It was sharp, crisp, and respectful. Elena didn't return it. She was a civilian now. She just nodded and walked out the door. The air outside the terminal was different. It didn't smell like JP-8 fuel and burning trash anymore. It smelled like air. Elena walked across the tarmac toward the commercial charter plane that would take her to Germany and then to the United States. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt she had bought at the PX. Her uniform was packed away in a duffel bag that was checked in the hold. She felt light. Strangely, terrifyingly light. No rifle, no radio, no armor, no weight. She stopped at the bottom of the portable stairs and looked back at the base. The giant concrete blast walls, the razor wire, the radar dishes spinning endlessly. It was a machine that chewed up people and spit out history. She saw a figure standing by the chain-link fence near the flight line. It was Miller. His arm was in a sling, and he was wearing PT gear. He didn't wave. He just stood there watching her go. He raised his good hand to his brow, not a salute, just a shield against the sun. Acknowledgement. We made it. Elena smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. She turned and climbed the stairs. She found her seat by the window. As the plane taxied to the runway, the vibration of the engines felt familiar, but this time she wasn't listening for the brrrt of the gun or the call of the Reaper. The plane accelerated, pushing her back into the seat. It lifted off, banking hard over the mountains. Elena looked down. The Hindu Kush was a sea of brown, jagged peaks, stretching out to the horizon. Somewhere down there, in a nameless valley, there was a crater that held the secrets of a dead man's ambition. But the valley was silent now. She leaned her head against the cool plastic of the window. The tension that had held her spine rigid for 10 years finally began to uncoil. She closed her eyes. She didn't see the war. She saw a front porch. She saw a dog. She saw a life that didn't require a clearance. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice came over the intercom. A soft, commercial airline voice, not the hard edge of a combat aviator. "We have reached our cruising altitude. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Elena Rossi opened her eyes and looked at the clouds. "Copy that," she whispered. She turned the page on her tablet, not to an encrypted file, but to chapter 1 of a book she had been meaning to read for years. The plane streaked across the sky, leaving a white vapor trail that lingered for a moment before dissolving into the blue, vanishing like a ghost that had finally found its rest.